I can see me.
Great stuff. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to ClayChat. Today we talk to David Walters, all the way from the Western Cape. And I look forward. He's going to talk about his journey. He's going to talk about his pots. And I look forward to it. David, it's all over to you.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much. It's lovely to be here and have people to chat to. That's great. Can you hear me properly? I mean, that's the main thing. Just not, yeah.
I can hear you with a slight rumbling.
Slight rumbling, oh dear. Shall I come closer or further away? Yeah. I've been a potter for such a long time that it's difficult to know where to start and where to finish. So what I've decided to do is to look at 3 studios that I've had. The one was at Caversham Mill in the Natal Midlands in the 1980s. And then we went to England for about 12 years, and that was the 90s. And then I came back to South Africa and lived in Franschhoek for 21 years. So that's quite a long period. But so what I wanted to talk about was this business of moving around and changing studios and things like that. For me, it was very good because I seem to need a new audience, and I enjoyed moving. I enjoyed building studios, and it's been good for me. There's money in it. I made money out of the various houses and studios that we built, and also we had a disabled child. So now this is a difficult thing when you have a child. Obviously not Sarah, it was James, and he was very disabled, and we moved to England for his sake largely, also for my sake, because I got a bit tied up with my pots in the Midlands of Natal. But so the Midlands of Natal, that was actually my 3rd studio, but nevertheless, it was the most wonderful place. It overlooked the waterfall, as you can see in the picture there. That's not a picture on the wall, that's the real waterfall. And that's the Lions River, and we had an old mill. And so my dad restored the mill, and we had everything working there. It was the most wonderful place. And I can remember the first time I walked into this building, which was derelict at the time, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I mean, it was just the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. So we eventually bought it, although it took time. So I had another property there, a farm, and I grew tomatoes there and all that sort of thing. So I'm getting a bit distracted. But the point is that we enjoyed living here, and while I was living here, I started the Midlands Meander, because we needed people to come around to our studios. All very well being out in the countryside, but you need people to come around and buy things from you and visit you. So that's what I did. I started the Midlands Meander in about 1984, I think it was, according to Michelle anyway. And we had a group of people. It was Ian Glennie was a potter living there already before I moved to the area. He was living in the Dargle Valley, and Andy and Helen Shuttleworth were weavers living up the road. Lindsay Scott was just up the river from me. Robin Standing and his wife, Wim and Tina de Rebay, were artists living in the area. And so we opened this this meander thing. And I tell you what, it worked right from the start. It was absolutely amazing. We had a dinner at my home here on the property in Caversham, and they all came round and we all had a wonderful meal and a swim in the pool. And I said to them, look, I'm going to start this thing. We're going to call it the Midlands Meander. And they were all so pissed and happy that they all said yes. So it's not so easy to start a thing like that. And it was a fairly loose affiliation. I mean, we just were members, but I mean, it worked very well for us. So that was part of that thing there. So now, if you want to go on to the next slide.
Oh.
Oops, we went a bit far.
There
we go. Those are the Meander folk. Those are the original Meander people. If you want me to go through them, but it doesn't matter. And that's the water wheel that my dad rebuilt for me at Caversham Mill. So it was really a beautiful place. So what was I making there? Let's have a look. The next slide, please. Oh, yes, that's the inside of the studio, the top photo there. That was a big studio, and I had two big buildings like this. So there was a lot of space to mess around with. A reduction firing kiln that in fact Jonathan Keep built for me. And that was a big kiln. And then the next one down is my dad and my sister and her daughter and Tim Morris's daughter. You know, because I had worked with Tim, and so we saw quite a lot of them. And then below that is me and Faye Burning, holding some pots in the doorway. Faye Burning came and worked in my studio from time to time. And she then, much later, quite recently actually, bought the property opposite the mill and lives there right now, and her people make up all that wonderful stuff at Ardmore. And then building the kiln there, all the university students from the year below my year at university. So what happened was I was invited to go back and lecture at the university, and so these are the students from that year. And this is a little kiln that Jonathan also built on my place, but this one we used for salt firing. But in that picture, you can see Ralph Johnson there, Ian Calder, Garth Carson, all sorts of folk from the university in those days that I went back and taught. So now I can't remember who I was at university with and who I taught there, but nonetheless, they're all good people. So now, what pots was I making? Well, the pots in these photos are kind of the sort of thing that I was making. They were fairly mature already, you know. Reduction firing does that for you. And what I was trying to do was to use glazes over the top of one another. So landscape was the kind of general thing, but I mean, that's not really something that was overpowering. That was the sort of background thing. It's a sort of a landscape thing. So when you know, and I decided right from the start that I would throw. So I mean, that's what I do. I sit on the wheel and I throw. And so you end up with round pots, and then, in my view, to make them more interesting, then the decoration goes across. Now that's not a sort of general rule, but that's just what I was doing at the time. So what I learned, and it took years to learn, was that glazes work on top of one another, and you get interesting layers and interesting interactions between the glazes and so on. So a lot of the work from that period was like this. And there are very few glazes here. The top ones are basically a Tomoku, and over the top of that is a matte white, a matte green, a matte blue, and celadon and so on. And I used a lot of iron oxide to decorate them with, so that's really basically what I was doing. They're interesting pots, though. You know, they seem to be over decorated at this stage. I mean, looking back, they seem a bit over decorated, but there's some interesting things going on, and I was selling them really well. So that's another thing. Okay, shall we go on? So we lived, I suppose. How long did we live at Caversham, my love? About 5 or 6 years we were at Caversham, and then I was getting a little bit sort of overpowered. You know, we were selling pots all over the place. Down the south coast was John Gay's, had a gallery, and we were selling loads of pots to him. Vance Waldeck was in Durban, and I was selling a lot of pots to him. Phase 4 studio he had there, and then I had a lot of people coming around on the Midlands Meander, so that, you know, that was also good. So you know, we were busy, and in fact possibly a little bit over busy, because I started to repeat my decorations and things like that. And also our son, although he'd been at Brown School in Maritzburg, he needed to move on, and we needed to move on. And our daughter, Sarah, the choices of schools for her around Natal were boarding schools with girls only, sort of thing, you know, and that wasn't what we were interested in for her. So with one thing and another, we decided to move to England. Now, in England, Michelle's mum and dad were living, and they were very keen for us to go over there. And by 1987, there was real problems here in the country, and we were politically aware. I had become a potter because I didn't want to take a job away from anybody else, and so on. So with one thing and another, we decided to move, and then we had this terrible flood, and the water in the river came down and washed the studio away and washed through our home, and so on. So it was a bad moment for us, and a definite sign. But nonetheless, we moved off, and we moved to England. And what we did was we caught a boat. We caught a boat in Cape Town, and we sailed on the Kililauro. Now, that was after somebody had been murdered on it, and before it sank. So I'm getting a bit sidetracked here, but off we went to England, and Peter and Jill had found this amazing property. It was a big property, and it had at least 5 buildings on 1, 2, 3, 4 big buildings on it. And one of them was this chapel that you see in front of you. It was an old Baptist chapel called the Particular Baptists, and it hadn't been used as a chapel for years and years and years, although it had lots of people buried outside. And one of them had written on his grave, "Be ye also ready." So that was a constant reminder of, what was to come. So, you got on and worked hard. Moving to England was good for me. I met a lot of potters there. It was good for my own work. But once again, we decided not to sell to galleries, although not a lot of galleries, that we had our own place in the particular pottery here. So the upstairs inside the particular pottery was our showroom, and people could look over the edge and see what we were doing, but not get touch and so on, get involved. So it was a magical studio, and I shared it with Jill Anderson. And Peter Anderson also worked there as well. So that's Michelle's mum and dad. And it was good. We spent how many years there, love?
10 years. We lived in the barn.
About 10 years. But I did up 3 houses on that property. To begin with, there was a stables, and I did that into a house, and that was a wonderful place. And then I fixed up the barn into a beautiful house. And then when Peter and Jill decided that they'd made enough pots and they'd had enough, they moved on. So we then had to build a house behind the particular pottery because, we couldn't own the chapel and the barn together. So that's sort of the background. Now, if you move on, I think we can go to the next slide. That's the building from the other side. That's our home behind the chapel. And below that, there's a picture taken upstairs inside of the chapel. So you can see there was like a sort of a gallery thing. And then you could see down below there where we were working. So that worked very nicely for us. If you move on, that was a picture. We bought a bit of the ground behind us, and that was the barn that I did up at the top there. Those are garages on the right, and that picture at the bottom there was a gallery inside of the barn. So we had lots of places to show work and to show other people's work. We got really involved in England.
Contemporary society.
And I was a member of quite a lot of societies there. There was the Norfolk Contemporary Craft Society. There was the Suffolk Craft Society that I eventually became vice chairman of. And they all exhibited in our spaces and things like that. So although we lived in Norfolk, we were pretty on the border with Suffolk, and we had a lot to do with Suffolk. Okay, if you move on one more. So the type of work I was doing there was again based on landscape. You can see the landscape ideas. This is a sort of a dinner service, a very early dinner service, because I quite rapidly came to the conclusion that you didn't want to decorate where people were going to put their food. So this is not the most successful dinner service, but I mean, that's the sort of thing that I was making in England. And I had a very good, good sales and a good following. So by this time, I had also decided that I love porcelain. Now, you use lots of different clays. I've used a heck of a lot of different clays in my time, but eventually I got to use porcelain, and I really, really love it. I identify with it completely. And so it was expensive. I bought it by the ton and used it for almost everything that I did. So, okay, so not making casseroles and things like that. but for everything else, I was using this beautiful porcelain. It's made by, I can't remember who. Yeah, it does matter. Pot clays. Was it pot clays? Pot clays. I think so. Anyway, they delivered it, so I didn't really have to go anywhere to get it. But it was wonderful stuff, and I still use reduction fired porcelain, and I still use porcelain to this day. You know, when you're using porcelain, you don't have to sort of tidy up after yourself and then use another clay. I don't do that. So I've just stuck with the porcelain, and that's what I use, and I love it. So now let's have another. The pots I was making in England were pretty finished. You know, the English are happy to buy pots. They love buying pots. They're good at it. They use them, but they've got to be properly finished. They've got to be good pots. Do you know what I mean? Useful. If you're making useful things, which is what I was trying to do. The underneath has to be properly finished off. The no muddle underneath. You know what I mean? It's got to be well finished, well fired, correctly. You know, good handles, good spouts, everything done properly, and then you get a good customer. You know, and by the time I was halfway through living in England, I was exhibiting with the craft society, the local craft societies, and I was on the Country Living Fair in London. Now that was very good for me, and I eventually became the potter who demonstrated at the Country Living Fair in London. So this is a lot of pressure, you know, but it was good for me to do that, and I suppose, yeah, I think I was, well, you know, I mean, these look very decorated, okay, and this was the time when we were all producing very decorated work, and I enjoyed the decoration. The top ones here are still landscape, still doing that, still making landscape things, and that's a matte white glaze at the top. Then below that is a shiny glaze that I used quite a lot for useful things like bowls and plates and things like that. And there's a bit of copper on there, you know, I'm still reduction firing at that stage. And then right at the bottom, apples and pears and things like that. Those were very jolly, very finished looking work that people enjoyed using, you know. That's got a blue glaze inside. And I can give you all of these recipes if you like. On the right, you'll see those are grape decorated pots. So I was doing a lot of decoration, wasn't I? And it takes time. I enjoyed the painting. I enjoyed all that. And I had my big kiln I took with me from South Africa to England. And in fact, I brought it back again. So it's still going. It's still around here somewhere. I sold it, but I gave it away actually. But I was busy, yeah. So can we move on to the next photo? All right. So eventually in England, I had gone perhaps as far as I could in this studio. This is not the English studio, by the way. This is in Franschhoek. But our son again became a problem for us. He was at a local school, and at the age of 16, what was it, 16, he had to move. We moved him to a place up in the north of England, which was, it was suggested to us to move him to. And he didn't do very well there. He was not happy, and became quite dotty, in fact, and was given the wrong medication by a medical psychiatrist fellow there. And so with one thing and another, we decided to move back to South Africa. Now, this sounds, when you're giving a short talk like this, it sounds like this was a rapid and a sort of unthinking idea, but it took us years. It took us years to make these decisions. They were based around not just me, but my wife Michelle and my son and daughter. And Sarah at this stage was at Norwich University Art School, and she was doing very well there. She had a wonderful time there. And in fact, we left her behind. She was doing a sculpture degree, and we actually left her behind, which sounds awful, but it wasn't so bad. We knew we would see her again soon, and she came out whenever she needed to. And her grandparents were just down the road, so it wasn't the end of the world. But nonetheless, it was tough for her, and she did a lot of growing up, and she came home with a very good degree from there. So we're really proud of her. So what we did, when we came back to South Africa, it became apparent that we needed to live somewhere where people can easily find you, and we needed a changing customer base. You don't want to live in a village in the middle of nowhere and try and sell your pots to the local people. It just won't work. They'll buy a few, and then there's nothing left. So we moved to Franschhoek because of its destination, its ability. So now, when you go to Franschhoek, as you probably know, you drive out of Cape Town, you drive into the beautiful winelands, and when you get to Franschhoek, you stop. You stop and you park your car and you get out and you wander around, and there's nowhere further. You can go further, but I mean, there's really nowhere to go to. So it's a destination. It's a wonderful place to go for a meal. It's a wonderful place to go for wine. And now, when we got to Franschhoek, there were two art galleries. There was us and Ebony. No, not Ebony. Doesn't matter. Bordeaux Street, yeah, that's right. And there were just the two of us. And now, when we left Franschhoek, there were 23 galleries all selling work there. So that's nothing to do with us, or it might have been, I don't know. But the point is that it became the place to go to for art, and it was very good place for us to be. Not only that, but I got interested in producing dinnerware there, and it's a place full of restaurants. It's a good place to go and eat. They're very good chefs, excellent chefs. And so what we did, I made dinnerware for clients, and so that sounds a bit boring, but in fact, each client that came in and ordered a dinner service, I made something really special for. So if, it depends on what they wanted, but I would also have input onto it. And what I did was I put their names on there, or some mark on it, or their initials or something like that, that marked it out as theirs, something special, specially made for them and theirs, so that when somebody came to their home to eat, it was apparent that somebody had taken the trouble to make them a dinner service for themselves. And boy, I tell you what, that took off. And I made lots of work for the local restaurants. And what we did, if you see this big table in the middle here, if you move on, I think we can have another picture of that. No, that's some of the work. Just move on another one. Another one. Yeah. We had pop-up meals. So this is inside of my studio, but as you can see, the places have been set. This was all done by Ruben, I think, Ruben's lot. And so we had different chefs, and we invited them, and they came along and cooked meals for people. We charged the people. We never made any money out of it, not a penny. But the chefs got paid, and people enjoyed their meals, and we could fit a lot of people around that table. How many? About 13 or 14 people. And it was very good advertising for what I was doing with the dinnerware. And although that doesn't show much dinnerware, does it? However, if you want to go back a bit, I'll show you some of the other work that I was doing there. Go back again. So, in addition to making the porcelain and the dinnerware and that sort of thing, I was also got involved in pit-fired work, smoked pit-fired work. And so these bowls at the bottom, these are very complex things. They are thrown, and then another bowl is thrown and put inside, so that there's a hollow bit there. And then that was round, so then I cut the whole thing in half and shaved a bit off and made it smaller and put it back together again, and then pit-fired it. And those lines on there are the smoke lines, which come with the pit firing. And then I put gold leaf inside these pots. So now, why, I'm not sure why I went to so much trouble, but it was just really interesting. And these were pots that were not for use at all. So having said that, I only made pots that were useful. I didn't. I got into other things as well. And I think they've got something of Africa about them, although I'm not really an African product, me. I'm not sure what I am, but African is perhaps not it. But those have got something of Africa. Now the pot above that, that pot there with the that's got glass in it. So what I did, I threw the pot, and then I melted flat sheets of glass. So if you imagine 2 sheets of glass put on top there, with decoration between the two, so that my same decoration, using my same colors that I was using on the pots, and I also used glass beads and things like that. And then if you imagine that pot put into the kiln and the glass melted so that it drooped down and into the pot, then it's loose, right? So I would take that bit of glass out and then pit fire the pot and put the glass back in again. So like, this sounds like a huge amount of work, and it is. But they were really interesting. So it's a glazed pot, but the glass is loose. And I put this one or something similar to it forward for an exhibition, a national exhibition. They said, the locals said, no, I couldn't put that on because I was mixing media. But anyway, it was interesting for me. Shall we move on? There we go. I don't know why I have so many pit-fired pots, but anyway, I won a prize for those ones on the left. There were 2 pit-fired pots on little rings that I made. They've got an African, I suppose that's an African theme, really. But they were interesting to do. And then on the right is some of the porcelain, which you can see right through, with little stamps and things on it. Yeah, I was having fun. I was enjoying myself. I had very good customers. I suppose, I mean, fortunately for me, but I suppose unfortunately, I don't know. I'm not in a position to say, but most of them were from abroad. So you got good prices, and Franschhoek was an interesting place to live, and we loved it. And we had our own gallery there, and an enormous house and all the rest of it. But it was a very conscious decision to move to somewhere like that where we could sell our pots. And we lived there. We lived in Franschhoek for 21 years. So that was very good for us, and we loved it. And we sold our property there about 2 years ago, just in time for the coronavirus thing. So we were lucky. We were very lucky. Can we move on? Let's see what else we've got here. Oh yes, we've done that. Yeah. Oh, there's another table. Yeah, we had great fun with the table. This was a meal done by Hette van Deventer at Lamott. She sort of runs Lamott, but she's a chef, and she came and did a beautiful meal for us. And we had all of these proteas on the table, pushed into lumps of clay. Quite extraordinary. Yeah, great fun, great fun. Then this is some of the pots that I was doing. I suppose I made these in Franschhoek, I think so, yes. Again, they landscape in a way, beautiful glazes, glazes on top of glazes. Give this a try. I mean, you know, I can't say to you, use this glaze over that glaze and so on. I can't say that. What you have to do is try it out and see what works for you, and when it works, use it, because it's a very interesting thing to do. And every time you open the kiln, you get a lovely surprise, or you get a bad surprise. But I mean, you know. Yeah, and again, these are wall plates, something that I've made throughout my career. I find them easy to make. I don't know why. And this is David Higgs. I made all the pots for his restaurant, Rist and Frieda, when they opened. And that was, God, at least 20 years ago. And I'm still making pots for their restaurant. I'm probably making some this afternoon, actually. So, you know, what's happening here, where David is sitting, there's a double-walled bowl. That bowl sitting on top of the 2 plates, that's double-walled, so that the food sits inside. and so on. Yeah, interesting. I don't know if you've been there for a meal, but if you haven't, you should go. This is a little show that I did in Cape Town, Design and Dava, I think it was called. And there are 3 chefs, Ruben in the middle, Camille Haas on the left, and David Higgs on the right. Just 3 of the chefs that I was working with at the time, with their pots in front of it. So, I mean, it was very good for me working with the chefs, and I loved them. They were good company, great people. Then Henny Mayer had an exhibition, and I got working for that, and I threw these pots. These are unglazed. There's no glaze on them. They are thrown with the color pushed into the surface. So, in other words, it's agate ware, but what I did was I made a lump of porcelain, and I mixed up other bits of porcelain with color in them, and then I pushed that into the surface of the clay just as I was about to center it. So the colors merge and do interesting things. They're not easy to do, but they're interesting. And that's what I'm busy doing now. Let me, I can show you later. I can't show you anything now, can I? So this is where I've moved on to. It's taken me 40 years or something like that. But I mean, I'm still throwing. That's what I believe in, and I enjoy the color. And these were interesting pots to make. Yeah. So let's move on again. I think that might be finished.
That's the last one,
Yeah.
Dave.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yes.
Well, the thing is, I've got millions of pots, and I can't show them all to you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's anybody else who would like to ask David questions. I've got a million to ask, but we'll open up the floor for questions.
Can I ask something, Rika?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Leanne.
Hi, David. Wow, your life experience is just something incredible. And one of the things that really stood out for me is one of the experiences you've had is working with societies and art interest groups. I've found that to be lacking in South Africa. I've only been doing pottery for about 5 years now. But one of the things that I found the most frustrating is that there aren't guilds and there aren't groups within our, in smaller towns, or just in towns, but in a smaller circle. So there's nothing specifically in Pretoria for people in Pretoria or in Johannesburg or in Cape Town, and I found that a little bit frustrating. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions on how we can get more of that going in South Africa so that people can belong to groups where they can learn? Because I feel like we're pretty much all isolated and trying to figure stuff out on our own. Even though we go to maybe studios, even the studio owners are on their own. They don't have something that they can belong to.
Yes. Yeah. You're absolutely right, and I've been trying to tackle this for a long time, and I think apart from having groups, I think that it's also interesting to join in with people who are making furniture or wood turning or doing something, ceramics
or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I learned such a lot in England from other people, making jewelry. The cross-pollination is extraordinary and is really good for one. So So it's not easy. You've got to sort of have, quite an open mind when you do approach things like this. But I've made the suggestion, I can't tell you how many times, to the local Potters Association that really we should exhibit along with other people. But the thing is, the Potters Association is the Potters Association. It's not a craft society.
Yes.
So maybe, you could find other people, find wood turners, or, my daughter here Sarah here in Newlands has got a gallery where she's showing all sorts of different things now.
I've seen it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, she's had a wood turner there who's absolutely amazing, and we've got somebody who's coming up with paintings soon, and I'm making some pots. I'll show them to you. I don't want to get sidetracked. Where am I? Yeah.
And it's beautiful.
These have got a bit of copper leaf inside, and they're just ordinary little pots, but they've been pit-fired, and I'm going to be exhibiting these with her. So, I think you have to do it. You have to find them, talk to them, and do it. The Potters Association is not going to do it.
I agree. I understand. Thank you so much for sharing your work. I am so inspired, and I so regret, as I'm sure many people starting later in life. I wish that I had had the foresight and maybe other people around me to encourage. And I think we need to encourage young people to get interested in pottery when they're still young, because it does take a long time. You don't just make a name for yourself in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, I started off in 1969. That's a long time ago, probably before you were born.
Indeed. Indeed. Not long before, but definitely before.
I started off with
Thank you, Rika.
David,
I have a question.
you go, Maggie.
Hi, David. I was wondering what your take is on I know Sarah's got a wonderful gallery, and I'm wondering, as a maker and a creative person, why you went the route of actually having galleries yourself and living with the gallery and working that way, compared to selling your work through galleries as well, having that experience. What would you say? Do you think both work well, or do you think one's a better way to go than the other as a maker? Because there's so much with galleries, you work so hard, and the commissions and the bets and the goodness knows what's that go with it. And also the other thing of just feeling a little bit like you got to sell something under to be able to sell it in a gallery.
Yeah. Yeah. There are a couple of things to say. When I started off, I had a small studio in Hilton and nowhere really to sell my own work. So I was dependent on Neil Sack Gallery and the ones around at the time. So this is a long time, I'm talking about long time ago. What happened to me, it's funny, actually. It's funny when I tell the story, but I was supplying a gallery in Maritzburg, and they were buying my pots and selling them on, and the guy that was running it, I can't remember who it was, so it's no good me trying to tell you, but he came to me one day and he said, now look, what you need to do is make your pots with a sell-by date, so that they've got built-in obsolescence, so that people come back and buy some more. And I thought, hey, I mean, there's no way that I'm going to do that. So that's when I moved to Caversham Mill and set up my own studio. And I've had my own studio with a gallery attached ever since. Now, that's not to say that I don't sell to galleries and things like that. Of course I do. But I sell my own work myself, and people enjoy coming into the studio. Now, it depends on you, okay? It depends on your attitude. But I love meeting people, and I love talking to people. And I enjoy what they say about my pots, even if it's not good. Even if they say, I'm not gonna buy anything, or something like that. But what you should be making is this, that, and the other thing. So I mean, but I mean, if you get over all of that, it's so valuable, because then you find out what people do like, and you experience their joy, they're paying for it, they are loving it, and they're taking it away from you.
So it's a win-win-win.
Wonderful. I absolutely love that. So that's what I've done. And I'm glad to say my daughter's doing the same. Yeah, Sarah's doing the same thing.
Wonderful.
David,
Did I answer you?
You said you love porcelain. You started working with porcelain when you were in England. How did you get used to our South African porcelain?
No, I did start before I went to England, experimenting with porcelain, and I bought it from, what's her name now? Gillian Bickle's porcelain. And I enjoyed that. That was good. But the English porcelain is probably better.
Okay.
You know. Yeah.
David. David.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah.
If you could get in a time machine and pot with any pottery civilization throughout history, which one would you visit?
This one. This one. Oh, it's so exciting now. You know, they're just people making the most wonderful things. I admire a lot. I mean, I admire, you know, they've been pots around for thousands of years. I mean, really. Probably the oldest, you know, and I'm busy reading a book, and it's about that thick, and I read about that much every night. And but it's about the history of people going to sea. So I mean, this is from I'm still sort of 2 or 3 centuries before Christ. But they talk about pottery all the way through, because that's what people took. And they landed over there with it, and they took it over there, and they made it over here, and they did this with it, and that, the other thing. And that's how we found out about these things. So, I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. But right now, people are making really interesting work.
And David,
does that answer your question, Charlie?
Absolutely. And David, if you were to do a residency and you could go anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Gosh,
residency. You know, I'm not much of a teacher. I really, you know, I did go back and teach at the university. But I'll tell you what happens. You say to somebody, this is how you do it. You do it like that. And you show them, and then 5 minutes later they come back and say, how do you do this? And you say, I've just told you, and I'm not going to tell you again. So I'm not very good at teaching. I didn't teach Sarah very well. She learned by watching. Yeah. So I'm not very good at teaching, but I think that the really interesting, well, maybe it's a habit on my part, but England is where it's happening. Yeah, yeah. The good potters in England are really good. Yeah.
Thank you.
I got to know No, not David. Well, I got to know David Leach, but I mean, I got to know
Walter Keeler.
Walter Keeler. Yeah, yeah, Walter Keeler.
Yeah.
Well done, darling. And you know, what a good potter! What an absolute first-class man and potter. I actually introduced him. I was on the board of this Craft Potters Association in London. I was a committee member there, and one of my jobs was to bring people to London to give talks. And I brought Walter Keeler. Wally came to London and gave a talk. And I introduced him at the Linnaean Society, and I stood up in the same spot where Darwin stood up and gave his talk about the origin of species. So that was a moment, I tell you. That really was a moment. Yeah, so I introduced Walter Keeler there. He gave a very boring talk, I must say.
Sounds so interesting, David. Question, do you mix your own glazes?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Do you want some of them? I can share them with you. I can share them differently with you. I don't have to share them now, do I?
No, not at all. I just wanted to find out you make all your own glazes. If I can touch on another subject, you are planning or you are writing a book. Is that a topic you want to elaborate on?
Well, I've got nothing to say except that, you know, that it's difficult to make significant amount of money when you're making pots. I've sold my pots well all my life, and I've lived well, and I didn't inherit any money from my parents. I inherited a property from them, but no money. And so it became apparent to me, especially with my son Jamie, that we would have to think about looking after him after we had gone and when we retired and things like that. So it became apparent to me. It wasn't something that I thought about, but it became apparent to me that by buying properties and then selling them and moving on and doing another property over there, not only was that good for me, it was also good for the
Side hustle.
the financials. So it's a side hustle. Yeah.
Wonderful. So you're going to capture that all in your book?
That's what I'm writing about. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to write about, you know, my pots and things like that. But I mean, that's really not really.
Other people teach.
Yeah, you know, some people teach and some people do different things. But that's how I've made some money. No.
You mentioned that you are currently working again. You have a special commission that you're working on.
Yes, Sarah's got an exhibition coming up, and I'm working towards that. I'm also making some huge bowls for a friend of mine. Yeah, I keep busy actually. I enjoy it. Not too busy, and I'm firing now on an electric kiln, and I'm not enjoying that really. It's difficult when you've been production firing all your life to get excited about electric firing. But I live in town now, so I don't feel that I can have a reduction fired kiln here. So that's a bit of a problem for me.
I can imagine.
But it's okay. I'll get there.
Fire with Sarah there.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else who would like to ask David a question?
Can I ask another question?
Yes, please do.
Right. David, talking about finances, I met a potter recently who had a terrible motor vehicle accident and is now really not able to work in the same way as they were previously. And part of my thought process, because I come from a corporate background originally, is how we can support people who are not part of a professional registered body, to have some kind of life cover or accident cover. Would that be something that you think would be valuable and helpful to the potters? Because obviously our hands and our bodies are the very things that make us money. And if we can't work, we can't earn.
I know. I've often wondered what would happen if I lost a finger or a hand or something like that. And I spoke to the people that insured things years ago, and they said, "Oh no, you can't do that." Look, when there was somebody injured down here, are you talking about in the Cape?
Yes.
There was somebody injured, and we did discuss this with the Potters Association. And Billy Neal, Betsy Neal's husband, went to a lot of trouble to find out about
Group insurance.
Yeah, it would be insurance for all that sort of thing.
Yes.
And we put it to the Potters Association, and we wrote to everybody and said, look, if you want to, we can get involved in this thing. And everybody said, no, thanks. So it's difficult. It's difficult, but
and part of the problem is, sorry, Karen.
No.
Part of the problem is it's not a professional body in that psycha, for example, where you've got your accountants, there's no, so that brings me back to my point again. There's no professional body in that we can't register as a professional potter because there's no qualification or prior learning experience that can be documented as an actual educational outcome. And because we can't get that, you don't actually get better rates. Whereas if you're in a professional society, like for lawyers or for accountants, they can get better rates. But in South Africa, there's very few. In fact, I think there's only 2 technicons now that include ceramics as part of their art degrees. And so there's there's not actually a professional registered body. And I would love to see that come back into, or have something like that in South Africa, because you have that in the UK. If you're a ceramicist or a potter, you can actually register. And here we've got Ceramic South Africa, but it's not a professional registration body. It's a voluntary membership organization. And that makes a very big difference. And I would like to see something more formal so that there's options for people. But yeah, I was just wondering, and I'm so glad that you answered that question because I didn't know about the previous exercise.
Yes, talk to Billy Neal. Talk to him. He's got all that information. It was there. We did it all, and we were quite disappointed actually
that
nobody took it up at the time.
I think the membership of Ceramic South Africa has also reduced beyond a viable value point. So for any insurer, they would need a valuable, point at which to make it. Need to grow.
What we've done as a family, and I know that my daughter Sarah's got something similar going, is we put aside a bit of money every month. But it's not easy. You've got to be very disciplined to do it. But if you are, an
emergency fund.
Yeah, you've got to have an emergency fund to cover things like that.
Thank you for that answer.
It's a question of doing it yourself or doing it as a society, as a group. But I don't know. I think you're right. I think we've fallen below the numbers that you would need. The thing is, people have got insurance and they've got this and they've got that, so they don't see it as necessary to to spend more money on something else until they get ill, and then they're really in trouble, until they have an accident and they're really in trouble.
We'll have to think about it some more.
Talk to Billy.
I will. Thank you very much. I will do that.
Thank you, Leanne. Anybody else for more questions for David? David, it seems that you've inspired everybody. They don't have to want, or they don't need to ask any more questions.
Okay, well, that's fine. That's good.
But I want to thank you.
What about you?
I've got plenty more questions, but what I'll do is, I think what we'll do is stop the recording. Thank you for your time.